Let me start by thanking all of you who submitted questions for the expert panel on intergenerational equity that we organized on 9 May 2013. We received a great number of comments and questions via Twitter and Facebook. And though I will only be able to address a selection of the questions, I would like to stress that we value your inputs and engagement very much. Let me turn to the first question. We received this question from Chris Groves from the UK via Twitter. Can we have solidarity with people who don't yet exist? Is it necessary to act responsibly toward them? Let me try to respond to Chris's question. The definition of solidarity refers to union or fellowship born of common responsibilities and interests. In this case, we are really talking about the responsibilities of one group, one generation to another. We cannot be sure we share the same interests, of course, as future generations. Beyond those general interests, we can assume are shared by virtue of our shared humanity. What do these include? Well, I would suggest they include the desire to live lives of dignity, to fulfill our human potentials, to be free of extreme physical deprivation, and to be able to share human fellowship and to live free from fear of violence. Of course, you may have your own list. There are many people alive today who do not enjoy these freedoms, and our responsibilities to our fellow human beings are first and foremost to the living, especially those who live in deprivation. Let me come to the second question, which is posed by Kekashan Basu from the United Arab Emirates, who posted the following question on our Facebook page. As a 12-year-old, my question is, why should the rights of future generations be decided by those, that is, today's adults, who will not live to be a part of it? Kekashan, let me try to answer your question. The issue of intergenerational solidarity is not simply about future generations who do not yet exist. It's also about present generations and the rights and responsibilities that bind together the living, for example, parents and children. After all, we live in a world where people are being born and die each day, where there is no such thing as discrete generations. Generation is a construct, not a fact of nature. We are constantly having to ask ourselves as humans how we should treat our elders and the young. What are our responsibilities to them and theirs to us? Humans who live a long and healthy life can expect to span perhaps 3 or 4 generations. We all transition through the different stages of life, and in principle, we adults know what it is to be a child, though admittedly, the strength of our empathy may become attenuated the older we get and the more distant our own memories of childhood. Children are clearly vulnerable to arbitrary adult abuse of authority, with limited autonomy and too little respect for their rights. That is why consideration of intergenerational solidarity needs to start with solidarity between present generations, one important manifestation of which is commitment to the welfare of children, to their health, education, and providing them with opportunities for the full realization of their human capabilities. To the extent that parents and adults in general have genuine concern for the well-being of the younger generation, their children, then their concern for the state of the world should extend beyond their own expected lifetimes. The same holds true for their children when they are adults, in a continuous chain linking us to the more distant future. I come now to the questions of Ekaterina Vladimirova from Russia, who posted a number of questions on our Facebook page. She asks who we think of when we speak of future people, our children and grandchildren or more distant generations, and how strong our moral motivation to do something for distant generations can actually be. Very good question. To address Ekaterina's question, it's plausible and squares with our intuition that people's concern for what happens in the future and to those living in the future tends to attenuate the farther into the future we go. So while I may care what kind of world my grandchildren inherit, I may feel less strongly about what will be the world inherited by people living 10 or 20 generations hence. This is not to say I do not care or I should not care. It is to suggest that caring is a conscious act of ethical judgment, not a natural inclination. In short, it is difficult to find ethical grounds for treating human beings differently simply based on their birth date. After all, babies born tomorrow will, by virtue of their being human beings, be entitled to enjoy the same human rights as all humans. Why not those born a week later, a year later, a decade later, a century later? There's no good argument. Why not? Yet our human empathy does, as Ekaterina suggests, attenuate with distance, both in time and also very often with distance in space or with cultural distance. So how do we bridge those distances? I would suggest through a judgment based on ethical principles. Those principles are captured nowhere better than in Article 1 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. It is such ethical principles that motivate the international community to unite in a global war on poverty, as reflected in the Millennium Declaration and the Millennium Development Goals. Such principles should also motivate us in the present generation to want to entrust to our heirs a world where it is possible for them to be free from poverty, to live in human dignity and freedom from fear. Yet we know that if we destroy the Earth's life support systems, resources, and ecosystems that contribute to our ability to live lives free of deprivation, we will very likely condemn future generations to the very poverty we are working so hard to end today. We know this, but we find it difficult to act upon this knowledge. Decision-making in governments, as much as in the private sector, remains very short-term in focus. How can we change that? There's an urgent need to do so. I come then to question 4 from Lucas Kahn. We received several questions on a possible institution at the UN or national level to represent future generations. Lucas of Germany asked, would the goals of an institution to represent future generations within the UN be in giving advice to nation states? Would they simply consider a general better future, or would they have specific goals in mind? Lucas and those of you who asked about institutions, some have suggested the creation within the United Nations of a High Commissioner position for future generations. This respected figure would be an advocate for their interests, serving in a sense as the conscience of the international community vis-a-vis the world we entrust to our children, grandchildren, and succeeding generations. We know how hard it is for governments to take decisions to constrain actions now to reap benefits in the future. Political cycles require that the interests of the present generation, in particular of voters, prevail in the political domain. Yet governments can set policies and create institutions that have enduring benefits through several generations. Social security programs have this character, as do investments in long-lived infrastructure. We must ask ourselves what it will take to induce public and private decision makers to extend their time horizons, especially when current generations may need to change our own values and preferences to be able to address these longer-term challenges. One thing we're coming to realize is that what we thought were long-term impacts of human activities like climate change are no longer long-term. The adverse impacts are becoming more evident by the year. This is another way in which intergenerational solidarity is no longer only about caring for future generations, but about young people alive today who may be forced to live in a world far less hospitable to human life than the one we know today. It brings me to question number 5 of Cyrilla Limpangog. She poses this question: how about shared and unshared accountability in the context of global environmental exploitation as linked to gender? How do unfulfilled or partially fulfilled gender needs and rights of the past and current generations of the third world inform the future generations' accountability. Women's well-being, women's health and education are crucial to transmitting well-being between generations. We know that. Social science has documented it. Healthy, well-educated mothers are perhaps the most important determinant of the lifetime opportunities open to children. Thus, investing in improving the well-being of women, especially those of childbearing age, but not only, is one of the best ways of combating the intergenerational transmission of poverty and inequality. Eradicating poverty is absolutely essential to making possible a lengthening of people's time horizons for thinking about what they value. Feeding one's children, keeping them alive and healthy, these have to be the preoccupations of the many millions of people still living on the edge of survival. It brings me to the sixth question. We've also received many comments from our social media users. Many of these stressed that people would have to become less selfish and start thinking more in the long term. Examples are Twitter posts by Mafer Aguilar and Maricruz Ortiz. Such a short time horizon is not necessary or justified, yet it is still all too commonplace for those of us privileged to live in the developed world enjoying good health, adequate food, various creature comforts. We have grown rich and accustomed to lifestyles that leave a very large footprint on the Earth's resources and ecosystems. And it is very difficult for us to think of sacrificing these comforts for the sake of future generations. Yet it is possible, and sooner or later we will have to adjust. The more gradually we do so, the less painful those adjustments will be. Indeed, the sooner we focus on the need to adjust, the sooner we'll make the technological and organizational innovations that will reduce adjustment costs and even create new opportunities for sustainable well-being. Unfortunately, decisive human action too often waits on a crisis. The scientists are warning us we are entering a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, where such ecological crises could well become commonplace. We urgently need ways of encouraging governments, businesses, individuals to think and act longer term. Maybe it will take an international high commissioner and network of national ombudspersons for future generations. Maybe it will take other institutional and policy innovations. Maybe it will take recurrent crises that bring forth stronger political will. Very likely it will take a convergence of several factors, a perfect storm. We must hope that we will have the foresight as an international community to be proactive. Being reactive is far messier and costlier, with much human suffering along the way. So with those observations, I would encourage all of you to join us in an online discussion on intergenerational solidarity in the coming days and weeks. Thank you very much.